I think many, after watching this week's episode of ReZero Season 2, is going to be on the edge of their seat after that final sequence of the episode with Subaru talking to Garfield and is like, I know hell. I have seen it many times. It's honestly emotional because you gotta look at it from both sides. We understand where Subaru's coming from. When we see him say those lines, we know for a fact he means them. We know the suffering and all of the pain he's been through throughout his journey since the first episode of Season 1. But then, when you see from Garfield's perspective of what peering into Subaru's eyes and trying to read him as a person, all he sees is insanity and a monster. It's a very interesting POV. It's a very interesting scene because it's kind of like a major contrast to the previous episode with Garfield being this monster, this demi-human that was just this unstoppable like tiger beast that Subaru was freaking out and shaking in his boots. It's a nice 180. It's a complete turn in terms of reaction between the characters and just showing that you don't have to be like a beast, a giant monster to actually scare even monsters. You have to be someone like Subaru that obviously appears very unhinged. But yeah, that final sequence really just was outright amazing. And you know what? I want to get right into that first, because I think that's what many are going to want to talk about, because it can probably be a little bit confusing because the way the episode presented, because there was obviously something Subaru said that was cut out and we didn't actually get to hear, which most likely we will eventually find out what it is. But the major point though is Garfield's reaction of how he viewed Subaru in that moment and how he's like, you were testing me, are you insane? And just the way he goes about that, he starts questioning Subaru, you could kind of read in between the lines of most likely what he was implying and what Subaru was doing in that very moment. If you look at Subaru's eyes and the way he confronts Garfield, you could see no fear. There is no fear whatsoever. And it really plays true to all the different scenes we saw throughout the episode after what happened with Sato and Subaru when he died. You see that he just confronts these problems and he's just being straight up blunt. He's not trying to, skirt around it. He's just trying to get to the bottom of everything. And I mean, all of that, when you see this scene where he confronts Garfield, Garfield's like, are you legitimately insane? You do realize with like a flick of my finger, you will probably die. I could end you right there, but you're confronting me that is angry right now, that could easily end you, and you're still wanting to pick a fight with me. He's like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're not like physically strong to fight me, but for you to even do this, there's something not right about you whatsoever, and that freaks Garfield out. He backs up. He doesn't know how to view Subaru. He's just like, their alarm bells are ringing in his head. He's like, what is this monster that is currently in front of me? He is not acting normal by any means. He is literally testing me if he can push me to the point of me just ending him right then and there. It was kind of like Subaru was testing Garfield's, I guess, kindness. How good of a person he really is. How far could Subaru technically push Garfield until there is no turning back? Kind of what happened in the previous loops where he turned into his tiger form to attack the villagers, and then also what we saw Subaru react to, what happened to Oto and all that. Subaru is obviously trying to see how far he can push him and kind of get into his psyche, mess with his mind to see what really makes Garfield tick. It's an interesting different change of pace, honestly, because it really brings up a major element that I think many don't give this series a lot of credit for, and that is the way Return by Death is used for ReZero. Now, we all know about how ReZero uses Return by Death. It allows Subaru to try a new loop, different alternates, try to go down different paths and correct things, etc. We know, and we now know the limitations of it and all that thanks to the previous episode. But there is one detail that I think many don't really go out of their way and acknowledge and talk about, which is kind of sad, honestly, and it's brilliant in terms of writing. We gotta think about Garfield as a character and how Return by Death as an element to the story has really benefited Garfield's character and made him such a fascinating character for this season. I mean, we gotta think about it. When we were first introduced to him, he seemed very energetic, he seemed very straightforward, he seemed very blunt, he didn't seem like he really was that smart. But then, after all of these constant loops, loop after loop, you see to where we have found out different, perspectives of Garfield, and that, he can be very hostile in one loop, and then very kind in the other loop, and then he might be actually willing to save Subaru even if he smells like the witch's scent. He'll just straight save him because he has a duty to protect Sanctuary. There's just so much about Garfield's character that we've gotten to see thanks to Return by Death, it's just something that you can truly appreciate. It's a really amazing writing element, honestly, because you gotta think about this. Normally, what we have seen from just Garfield's character alone, and normal writing standpoint, if you're not like a god-tier writer, basically, it would take a long while to build up to learning everything about a character, especially a support/side character like Garfield, and actually knowing kind of how he ticks, and how Subaru even is kind of hinting that he's trying to figure out what makes Garfield tick, how far he can push him, how angry he can make him, you know, exactly if he's willing to cross that line and get rid of Subaru right then and there, or put him in prison, whatever. You know, it shows these different elements of personalities we normally would not get without Return by Death. And it's just, like I said, something I truly appreciate, and it's an element to the story I think many don't really acknowledge. The same could be said for Amelia, the same could be said for Ram and Rim. You know, all of our characters, we've got to see different perspectives of them and kind of what makes them tick as individuals. It's brilliant character development and characterization, and it's just another perk to ReZero's story using Return by Death. But okay, enough with that though, let's back up though. I think I kind of explained the Garfield scene pretty, easily. Basically, Garfield obviously was very scared. He was worried because, for some reason, Subaru was just willing to throw his life away. It's very apparent by the way the scene is, the way they interact with each other. We may not know what Subaru said to the man, but it's still very clear that Subaru just seems very unhinged in that entire moment. And he even says to himself, he's the only one that needs to experience hell. He's the only one that needs to experience that pain. Nobody else needs to do this, which actually correlates with the final sequence of the previous episode of ReZero Season 2. If you remember what Roswaal said at the end, he said that if you want to journey through hell, I will gladly walk there with you, and I will stay there with you. Just the way Roswaal says that obviously directly correlates to what Subaru said within this episode. So it does show that there is more meaning to Roswaal's dialogue than we were actually led to believe. It completely plays into those final words that Subaru said at the end of this episode. So more food for thought. It makes you wonder exactly what Roswaal truly does mean. Is he 100% on Subaru's side, or did he say those words to another person? There's so many questions. Which, speaking of which, if we're going to get into Subaru's unhinged nature, this does need to be brought up because it's an element that obviously has been very reoccurring in these episodes, especially after the last episode of ReZero we got, with Subaru finding out about his limitations, or no limitations to Return by Death. He now knows that he technically has unlimited lives. As long as Satala's, overall perspective of delusion remains on Subaru, whatever the delusion really is, Subaru probably will never have an end to his loops. He'll never have an end to Return by Death. So he never has to worry about dying and never being able to come back, unless, he does something to where Satala no longer wants him to come back. Point is, though, is that Subaru now, he's now kind of been unshackled, unchained from the restrictions of death. He now could potentially just throw his life out there to be able to figure out different means of going around certain problems, to be able to save people from the hell that he was talking about, to be able to make people happy and not have to suffer. It's a very big deal. It shows that Subaru's slowly detaching himself from his very life. And I mean, even what he did within this episode when he put a note down to give to Amelia, he didn't want to tell Roswaal, he didn't want to tell Ram, he didn't want to tell Otto, anyone. He didn't want to tell anyone that he was leaving. He only left a message for Amelia because he wanted to leave it on a good note. He wanted to leave it on a note basically to let her know where he was going, and he even said to himself it probably doesn't matter to begin with because this is most likely the end of this loop, but he's going to leave it regardless because it's the only thing that really keeps him human, and also the only thing that allows him to kind of keep his mental state grounded, and it's the only thing that stops him from completely shattering. But he's obviously wavering as a normal human being. You can see his mind is not in the right state anymore, because him just leaving that message behind like that, but also him willing to just go find answers with, Beatrice and just try to figure out what's going on there, shows he's just willing to throw his life. He's just trying to get as many answers as he can before he actually dies, which completely correlates with his Garfield scene and how he was willing to just throw his life right then and there to figure out what's going on, to be able to go over this hurdle with Garfield and uncover whatever secrets he actually may be hiding. Just Subaru's mental state is has obviously taken a turn for the worst. He is slowly becoming more and more detached from death. I mean, the way he talked to, Petra in this episode towards the end, when he's like, oh, thank you for, the handkerchief, it was able to help me out and all that, save my life. And he's like, wait a minute, I didn't really mean it like that, but, it helped me and all that. It helped me right now. And just the way he goes about that shows he's so detached from his death, it no longer bugs him. And he's using Return by Death to the absolute fullest to uncover and deal with problems that are presented before him. He's willing to suffer as long as nobody else has to suffer. It's an interesting change of events for Subaru's character, because this is something that many have been wondering about for a very long time. I remember when I was talking about, ReZero Season 1 while watching it for the first time, I remember many wondering, like, why doesn't Subaru just use Return by Death and overcome all his problems? Just continue to die, figure out everything. Just like, oh, if this messes up, just die, go find another answer. And many were wondering why he didn't do that, and one of the big arguments that it always was is that Subaru did not want to die. At the end of the day, he is human. He doesn't want to die. But you can see after countless deaths, you slowly become more and more desensitized, detached, and now knowing he has no limits, he no longer needs to worry about it. He's more detached than he's actually ever been from reality itself. So, yeah, it's just something I wanted to point out, that this episode really wanted you to notice, especially with Subaru's character, and the overall moment when he looks at Emilia, and he's like, I believe in you, I know you can do this, I know you can overcome this, and all that, I really do mean it. And you just see the way his head tilt is, the way his eyes are drawn. Just so much about that scene feels very ominous, unnatural even, and it's just so many little POV shots that the animators put in that really just give so much life and mystery to the story. Let's talk about the beginning now. So, Satala and Subaru and Garfiel and all that happened at the beginning. There is so much to process, so much to talk about, and so let's begin with just how Garfiel got instantly demolished, because this is a very insignificant in comparison to everything else that happened in the scene. I know that's saying a lot, especially because of how important Garfiel has been to the story, but it just goes to show how powerful Satala is. Like, you can't fight her. I mean, we gotta remember what was stated literally in Season 1 by Puck himself when he was fighting, Petalogius, Beetlejuice. He was like, if you want to be able to defeat me, you need to at least use half the hands that Satala can use, like 1,000 hands. So we know for a fact that there is just no way that Garfiel would be able to beat Puck, and that would mean if he can't beat Puck, there's just no way he would be able to beat Satala. So just when you look at everything, the man never stood any chance. But it does put in perspective, though, just how powerful Satala is, and how, she was easily able to just demolish Garfiel in a fraction of a second. He had no time to do anything. She just punctured him, and boom, he was just gone, just missed. Which, just scary. It shows her absolute power, and it really does show that those, I guess, stories about her and how she consumed half the world in shadow and darkness definitely is most likely turning out to be very true, especially because of what we witnessed in, this episode, which goes into the next part. The shadows. So Subaru finds out something very interesting about the shadows that Satala has that was slowly consuming the environment, the world, the people, everything. He found out a secret, that when he was consumed, he didn't instantly die. And the question many might wonder is, did Satala keep him alive purposely because she didn't want him to die? Because obviously she is the one that bestowed him Return by Death. And if she was to, let's say, kill him, he would probably reset to a certain point back, and she would no longer have him in her grasp. So that's probably why she kept him alive in her shadows. But it does raise a question. Does this mean that everyone in the shadows are still alive in some thoughts, like they're just in thoughts being consumed by all these thoughts coming into their head, kind of like a hive mind? Or was Subaru the only one that was lucky that was not able to be consumed by Satala's shadow? Questions there. But the big point, though, is that Subaru got to see for himself just how vast Satala's shadow can reach and what it can really do. Everyone that she consumes with her shadows, she kind of gains their thoughts, their memories, and Subaru was able to figure out things that he had no knowledge of until that actually happened to him. Finding out the location of where to put the crystal at, finding out a little bit more about the mysteries and all that of Ruzu, but thanks to probably Garfiel and Ruzu's memories, there is so much that, he gained thanks to being in Satala's shadows. And obviously Satala Satla had no idea or probably didn't intentionally want that to happen, but it shows, though, that there was some benefit to Subaru's death that was something he did not expect whatsoever, and it shows the power of Satla, but also how Subaru was just overcome by so many thoughts. It's kind of like a hive mind, and it's frightening to think about. Imagine having so many people's thoughts just penetrating into your head, and you might not even think you're your own person anymore if you keep hearing everybody's memories and thoughts into yourself. Are you really you anymore? And so Subaru probably had some form of mental distress after that. You gotta imagine that probably even broke his sanity even a little bit more, having all those memories just flooding right into his head like that. And this is what's probably going on in Satla's head. She probably has so many memories and knowledge going on around her, thanks to her shadows continuously consuming everything. It just shows, like, holy crap, this is probably what she's constantly dealing with too. Which, now getting into the next point, is Subaru getting out of a very bad situation, using the handkerchief to escape. Now, here's the thing about this. The handkerchief was definitely set up thanks to Ekidana. She is the one that allowed Subaru to get out of that situation. Now, you're probably wondering what really happened there. So, to kind of explain it in the easiest way possible, Ekidana, when she actually took her debt or her gift from Subaru, like, the debt she needed to collect, she gave Subaru the handkerchief to have the ability to sharpen like a blade to completely end him. So, technically, the price that Subaru had to pay was death itself. That's kind of what most likely Ekidana was trying to, say, is that you would use your loved one's tool to be able to end yourself, to be able to get out of a situation. So technically, death was the price. That is what Ekidana wanted from him, because she knew that it wasn't a permanent thing, but at the same time, it does still matter. Death is a very big detail, a big point for Subaru. And so she used that to be able to kind of allow Subaru to get out of that situation. Now, to kind of extend upon this as well, though, when Subaru committed the act to be able to get out of it, you see Subaru grab Satla's, veil on her face. He pulls it off, and upon pulling it off, you see a face that is eerily similar to Amelia, and this raises a lot of questions. Obviously, you're going to notice the automatic identical nature to the facial expressions, the way the character's drawn, everything about it is the exact same to Amelia, and Subaru starts to just freak out. He's in absolute shock. He's always heard the stories that, you have a half-elf and all that is like Satla. Amelia's always been compared to Satla for as long as he can remember. It's been the first thing that was really introduced into the story on the first episode, is that, Amelia was always compared to the Witch of Envy. And seeing the face of, Satla like that, it makes Subaru like, holy crap, I'm very conflicted. Like, the one I love really does look like this monster, really does look as scary as this. And you could see Subaru was wavering. When he actually used Return by Death and he returned and he looked at Amelia, he started to shake. He was frightened, because now when he looks at Amelia, he sees Satla. He no longer just sees Amelia, he actually sees Satla, and that messes with his mental state on a whole other level, and he's just like terrified, and he had a mental breakdown, because it's no longer just Satla taking, let's say, lives away from him or whatever. Now you have it to where Satla has potentially taken away his overall full image of Amelia, or a piece of Amelia's image from him, because he will no longer ever be able to look at Amelia the exact same way ever again. He may still love her, he may continue to be nice with her and everything, but it's never going to go away that he was frightened. He was frightened for his life thanks to what Satla did, and seeing Amelia's face reminds him of that moment. Every time he looks at Amelia, he's going to be reminded of that moment for a very long time, until he's eventually able to overcome that issue. So, yeah, it just like, seeing that facial expression, it's very complex as well, because you see Satla start to cry, and it starts to make you wonder, like, why? Why is Satla crying? Well, it's kind of very obvious, honestly, when you think about it. Satla bestowed Return by Death to him. She is the Witch of Envy. And if we look at her dialogue throughout this episode and at the end of the previous episode, she's constantly saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And when Subaru's like, I don't love you, and she's like, love me, love me, love me, just everything about Satla's dialogue, it's very obvious why she was sad. She doesn't want Subaru die or get hurt, which is very weird. It's very, weird why she would get emotional for Subaru's death, because she's the one that technically cursed him with this endless cycle of death. And so for her to be upset, it feels very weird. It's like a contradiction. Like, why would she be like that? Why would she act like that when she is the very reason why Subaru's having to do that in the first place? And so it complicates Satla's character to a whole other level. You're like, why is she acting like that? And then Subaru's like, I will save you. Was those words meant for Satla, or were they meant for Amelia? That's another complicated moment, because we don't really know where those words were directed to, or who they were directed to. We don't know if he was directed, I will save you, to Amelia or Satla, because at this point, we know that he saw Satla crying, but it was with Amelia's face. So it made Subaru wonder, or makes you wonder, did Subaru want to save Satla, or was he saying, I'll save you, Amelia, I'll make sure that, nothing like this ever happens again, I'll make sure that I save Sanctuary, make sure that you don't have to suffer, make sure that the mansion is a-okay, I will do my very best. So, lots of mysteries, obviously, more mysteries and, more questions than answers in typical ReZero fashion, but it wouldn't be ReZero without that. So, okay. So with the little nitty-gritty that we got throughout this episode of ReZero, we have a little scene with showing Ram actually saving Garfiel in the final moments before Satla popped up and all that, before Ram died. She grabbed Garfiel and threw him out of the way, got him out of the shadow, saved his life, and in turn is how Subaru was actually able to be alive, and how he was able to come to the conclusion he was at to be able to end it all. It's a very important moment as well. It shows that technically, indirectly, Ram saved Subaru, because by saving Garfiel and Garfiel saving Subaru, it allowed Subaru to gain enough knowledge about the moment to eventually be able to overcome this issue and also be able to get rid of this loop to go to the next one. Ram definitely did a lot, and it shows that Ram is very caring. She may seem very stubborn, she may seem very cold-hearted, but she is very caring, and she does definitely care about Garfiel as well, for her to even do what she did by throwing him to save him at the cost of her own life. Says a lot about her character. Another little detail to also get into is the whole Ruzu stuff, because I know that's going to be a big one for many that watch this episode, besides just the Satla and the Garfield stuff. Ruzu had a very unique scene, and it kind of plays into everything about Ekidana and what's been building up kind of since the very beginning of Season 2, and why Ekidana is so fascinated by Subaru. I mean, it's very apparent. She wants to know all. She's the Witch of Greed. She wants to know knowledge, etc. It's apparent why. But there is a bigger reason now to why she seems so attached and wants to know so much about Subaru, is because Subaru is very similar to her. Or at least what he is what maybe Ekidana was never truly able to accomplish, and that is immortality. Because when you really look at it from a different perspective, what Subaru is going through is immortality. He may be dying, but he effectively is able to keep his memories, all of his knowledge, and go to a different, loop, and he is able to relive these events again and even do a different way or go different paths, etc. It's immortality. And obviously, Ekidana most likely is very jealous. She wants maybe that, or she maybe is just wishes she could be like that, or maybe the project of immortality, maybe she would have been able to finish it, because we get a lot of details now of what Sanctuary actually is, and what maybe one of its major purposes was for. Ekidana created Sanctuary to probably create immortality, be able to create a soul, create life itself. It's even implied. Ruzu's body, the original Ruzu, was used to be able to actually create life, or create clones of Ruzu, and create souls, etc. So, Ekidana was trying to find the secret of immortality, life, the soul, etc. It's a common theme you would see. If you know about anything about the Philosopher's Stone and other references in mythology, it's a common talking point. It's something that's always going to be relevant for humanity as well, because immortality is something I think all humans always strive for. It's something that many of us always want. We want the ability to continue to live for the rest of our life. Even if there might be consequences of immortality, there's a lot of people that have strived to try to achieve it. And in this case, Ekidana is another character that is very similar. She is striving, or did strive, to achieve immortality, but obviously, thanks to her life being kind of cut short, she's now a soul, it's very apparent that she did not fully get to achieve it. However, the mechanisms and all of the projects that Ekidana kind of set up are still going on without her. For instance, the clones of Ruzu continuing to pop up for over 400 years, and even the Sanctuary still functioning like it is. It shows that even with Ekidana gone, technically what she was trying to do is still progressing in a certain way. And you can even see Ruzu, or, Lolly Granny, that is actually technically a representation of Ekidana creating life. She may not have been able to create immortality, but she was able to create life itself. She was able to create something that now has its own life, has its own memories, has its own perspective of what it wants. For instance, Ruzu's character is very fascinating because she talks to Subaru and is like, I am artificial, like, I'm not real and all that. I was created, and I was put in place to be able to watch over everything, and, even though she was obviously put in place to watch over everything, it's clear that she's developed her own little tics, her personality and all that, because she drinks tea. It's something she's picked up on over the 400 years she's been alive, to just the way she talks, the way she interacts with Garfield, just everything about it is very mysterious, but it's obviously showing that she isn't just a machine, something that's keeping this project together, that she is obviously developed into something much more than what she once was. Her purpose has definitely changed slightly. So it's a fascinating thing. It's showing what Ekidana created. Even if it wasn't what she imagined, maybe, she did create something with Ruzu and all the clones and all of that. Now, speaking of the clones and everything, we also get a little bit more details to Garfiel and how he was actually able to command the clones, because we get a little bit of details on what Subaru currently is. Subaru is an apostle of greed. Big detail right there. That is a major detail. Basically means that he's like a Sin Archbishop to Ekidana herself. That's exactly what that kind of means. And seeing how it was stated that you have to be an apostle of greed to be able to actually manipulate the Ruzu clones and doing what you want them to do, it makes you wonder, how was Garfiel able to do that? Garfiel was able to manipulate the clones to attack Satla at the beginning of this episode. And for that to happen, that would mean that he would need to have the privilege of being a apostle of greed. So, that is why Subaru asked the question, does that mean that Garfield took the trial? Does that mean he actually took the trial? That means he must have met Ekidana. He must have met her, and somehow she bestowed upon him the ability to actually command all the Ruzu. So she did something. She definitely did something to Garfield, which explains his overall interaction and why he acts like he does towards Sanctuary and the clones and all of that. Everything is kind of coming together with the actual story. But it also makes you wonder, is he cursed? I mean, we don't really know. We know that there's a likely possibility that maybe Ekidana could have given something to Garfield, and maybe he is cursed. He might have something like similar to Return by Death. Maybe not one by one or the exact same, but he might have some form of element that he's not able to talk about, something that is very similar to Subaru. And so it does make you wonder, is there, kinship there between Subaru and Garfield and what their characters are, because they're technically both now apostle of greed, because it's the only thing that he technically could be if he's able to command the Ruzus. So I guess the last thing to talk about before I wrap up this video is the Beatrice stuff at the end. Beatrice acts very calm, more calm than she ever has since the start of Season 2, honestly. We've always seen her be very flustered. She gets very upset, emotional. She always contradicts her actions and all that. She says things, but the emotions on her face say otherwise. We've seen constantly that Beatrice has been very emotional. And seeing her in this episode, she seemed very calm, very assured that what this entire conversation with Subaru is about. She seemed like she was ready to hear the words she needed to hear, which we do know that she has a book, and the book she got, the Gospel, one of the, replicas of the Book of Wisdom, we know that is able to see parts of the future. So most likely she's very aware of why Subaru is there to begin with. She's very aware of why Subaru is coming to probably ask something or find out questions or whatever. She's aware of this. So seeing her calm mental state like it is, she's already ready. She's ready to hear what she wants to hear. It's interesting. What did she see in the book, and what is she ready to hear from Subaru himself? And what is Subaru going to learn, and what are we going to learn from her in the next episode of ReZero? But I think that's pretty much about it. It's a good episode. I love it from start to finish. There is a lot of details. There's probably more that I'm not even really thinking about on the top of my head. And if I do need to, I will make a separate video to talk about more details if I have to. But with that, I love you guys. You have a wonderful day or not wherever you live. Please be safe. Stay healthy. Chibi out.